All right. Um, yeah, this is something I've been planning on discussing and something I've been planning on doing for pretty much the whole week. It's just been a busy week, and I've been doing some things, but this is something very important that I wanted to discuss. I know I did a piece a couple weeks ago about the psychological war in the Black community, and when I did that, I felt immediately like I left some pieces out the puzzle, and I really needed to go a little bit more in depth. And I think I'm going to turn this into a series where I discuss some of the things that have been going on. And I really think it's important that we talk about the effects of the psychological war in the Black community in regards to our children. Um, Many of the things that we as adults are struggling to deal with: depression, anxiety, low self esteem, you know, a tendency towards mocking ourselves, hurting ourselves, self destructive patterns of behavior, all that. For many of us, it started off in our childhoods because of the trauma and the things that we've gone through. And I think it's very important that we take a moment to really analyze the way what we as Black people endure in America, how it affects our minds, our bodies, and our lives. And I just wanted to just discuss a couple of stories to show you the psychological damage, the power, the toxin, the poison of American racism. And I'm going about this very slowly because I've done this research, and this presentation is being given to you with a heavy heart. It literally scares me because I'm a Black man with two Black sons, and seeing the things that kids endure and that parents have to try to protect their children from, it boggles the mind. It really boggles the mind. So I wanted to discuss this, give everybody a heads up of what to look for, give everybody a heads up on ways to engage our children, the ways that we can protect our children, and show you what to protect our children from, which is racism. It's a big battle that we're going to have to fight. And I want you guys to be prepared. I used to have a friend of mine, my friend who I knew since I was about 8 years old, one of my closest friends, and his mom. I used to hang out with the family as a friend of the family, and his mom was a woman from the South. Her name was Linda, and she had all these sayings that were very, very wise, very interesting. And she had this one saying. She used to always say, "Don't see the world through rose-tinted glasses." And I don't want you guys to see the world through rose-tinted glasses. I want you to understand that this is a very serious situation. I don't want you to downplay it. I don't want you to pretend like it's okay. I don't want you to pretend like things are going to be all right, because we're dealing with monsters. So let's start with this first story. The first story is about a young man by the name of Jeffrey Taylor. Now, Jeffrey Taylor was the child of Jermaine and Lakeisha Cheney. Um, he was found dead in his bedroom with a gun that his parents owned. Now, we're going to go a little bit more in depth to tell you what happened before that moment. What happened to him before that moment? He had been the only Black student in a class at Salito Elementary. I'm going to say the names of all the individuals involved that I have that are available, because some of these individuals, I want you guys to be aware of them. I want you guys to be aware of these schools. I want you to be aware of these institutions and aware of the people who are involved, because they are the ones who we must hold responsible. And if necessary, we must apply pressure to make sure that justice is served. Now, at Salito Elementary School, this young man was called a nigger. He was called Blackie, ugly. He was mocked daily, bullied daily for the color of his skin. And this is a young child in school with other young children. So these psychopathic racists, they begin recruiting and training their children to have the same lunatic mindset as them. They train them at an early age, probably from birth. They're probably teaching these kids racism and how to hate Black people and how to treat Black people from birth, because it makes no sense. It makes no sense for a young child to look at another child who could be a potential playmate a classmate, a friend, and say, "You're a nigger." This is something that's been taught. And they're teaching their children at a very early age how to treat our children. While we teach our children that they need to be patient and they need to turn the other cheek and be compassionate and be kind, they teach their children to take advantage of our compassion and to psychologically, emotionally, and in some instances, even physically kill our children. While we keep trying to figure out ways to ameliorate the situation, other people are trying to figure out ways to ramp the situation up. And our children are paying the price. Now, in the classroom where this young man went, Jeffrey Taylor, in the classroom with Jeffrey Taylor, he was the only Black student. And he's also the only Black student in his school. And the teacher decided to segregate this young child from the other students. She says she segregated him from the other students because she didn't want the other students to mock him or harm him. So she decided to keep him separate from everyone else. Now imagine the psychological torment of not only being mocked daily, called a nigger, a blackie, darky, ugly every single day, but imagine that your teacher, in order to help you, decides to separate you from the other students. She decides that she wants to treat you differently from the other kids. So not only is he's being dealt the painful blow of daily racism, but he's also being dealt the blow of educational segregation. Just think about the level of fear and isolation that this child, and I'm going to keep emphasizing that. Imagine the level of fear and isolation that this child has to deal with every day. Not only at the hands of his fellow classmates who are racists, but of his teacher, an authority figure. Imagine how the fear and isolation is compounded when someone who is supposed to be a social refuge, somebody who's supposed to be someone you can turn to for help. Imagine when they decide to separate you from the rest of the classroom, treating you differently, making you stand out even more so. Instead of her telling the other students to stop and cease and desist, she decided that you should be separated. That will solve the problem. Just imagine the level of fear and terror this young man had to deal with every single day. Going to a place where every single day a defenseless child is going to be tormented and degraded and not protected. So, after this young man took his life, the police investigated and they ruled his death an accident. It's unclear if they looked for signs of suicide, but they ruled his death an accident. Now, a young man is found dead with a gun. They say it was an accident. What do they mean by accident? Does that mean that he was playing with the gun? Does that mean he was cleaning the gun? Was he taking the gun for target practice by himself in the home alone and decided, oh, let me play with this, and accidentally blew his brains out? He accidentally, if it's an accident, that means he accidentally took his own life, right? So what was he intending to do? If you have an accident, that means you were intending to do one thing and then something else happened. What was he intending to do with the gun? Because if you can't prove to me what he was trying to do, what he was going for, what was his goal, what was his agenda, if you can't prove these things, how can you rule any of this an accident? Based upon what it's an accident? How do you know this young man didn't take his own life? And I want you guys to really pay attention to this and notice this, because you're going to recognize that there's a pattern of behavior. I'm going to point it out in 1 second. But statistics are showing that suicide is the second highest cause of death in Black kids from age 10 to 14. The third leading cause of death in Black kids from 15 to 19. Think about that for a moment. The second highest cause of death in children 10 to 14 is suicide. Are you starting to get an idea? Is it starting to sink in and register in your mind how intense and how deadly and how lethal this racism that we've been taking casually for so long? For so long, we've been taught this turn the other cheek and love thy enemy nonsense. We've been taught this ideology of being the long-suffering victim. And the more we suffer, the more God will bless us. Don't worry about heaven on earth. Don't worry about justice. You'll have your heaven in the sky. Khalid Muhammad mocked that. He said that, we're too busy looking for pie in the sky and sweet by and by, instead of looking for something sound on the ground in the here and now. I want my children to live free now. I want people who exploit my children and who expose my children to racism and hate and bullying. I want them to be punished now, not in some hereafter, not in some imaginary hellfire somewhere. I want them punished now, so that my children can witness their suffering. That's reasonable and logical to me. I don't believe in any of this delusion. We pretend like racism doesn't exist, or pretend that we can date our way out, or have sex and destroy racism. Somebody told me they were in an interracial relationship. They thought that would help destroy racism. Nah, that's just a way for you to avoid it. You don't want to avoid it. You don't want to deal with it. You want to avoid it. So you decided, hey, if I date somebody who's not Black, that's going to help me destroy racism in time. Guess what? The second highest cause of death in children is suicide. I don't think your plan's working. Our children are dealing with the racism you're afraid to look at. Plan's not working. A 9-year-old girl named Mackenzie Adams committed suicide on December 3rd. I have a son, young Black son. His birthday is December 4th. So while we were celebrating my son's birthday, this little girl was taking her own life the day before. In a place called Demopolis, Alabama. She attended a school called U.S. Jones, or is that a V? My handwriting got sloppy. I think that's V.S. Jones Elementary. V.S. Jones Elementary. Remember the names of these schools? These are the people who are accountable to us, to the community. She was bullied and the school ignored the complaints by the parents. Now keep in mind, the parents from the first young man, they had been making complaints for a while as well. They had been demanding the school do something to address the bullying as well. And these schools act very slowly, and these schools don't want to penalize white students. So a lot of times what happens is these parents are trying to fight the good fight as best they can, just to have these schools ignore what's happening. And then you transfer your kid from one school to another. But if you live in a racist area, that's just, you're trying to get water out of the Titanic with a teacup, running from one place to the next, trying to take care of the problem and protect your child. But everywhere you look, there's more racism. Everywhere you look, there's more water, and the Titanic is going down. Now, her parents had gone to the school and said, hey, listen, you got to do something. And the school, it was slow to act. The parents are filing a lawsuit against the school. And the lawsuit states, and I want you to hear this, the defendants exhibited deliberate and blatant indifference to the wrongful, persistent bullying and harassment rife with racial and gender-based slurs imparted upon Mackenzie by a boy who was her classmate. Once again, we had another young, aggressive racist. Now, we're going to address how we can protect our children from racism. We're going to have to also address the fact that these racists are being trained young. We can't ignore that anymore. You can't ignore the fact that these kids are being taught by their parents. Their inheritance is racism. Instead of inheriting money and wealth, quite often the first thing they're going to inherit is their hatred for us. That turn the other cheek, love thy enemy stuff is not working. It's not protecting our children. We're not addressing the issue because we're so busy trying to figure out ways that we can pacify the individuals who are victimizing us. This mentality of figuring out ways we can blame ourselves for racism, we're done with that. We're done with that. I'm tired of the excuses. If we just pull our pants up, if we just speak proper English, if we get better jobs, if we work harder. No, there's no pacifying a psychopath. That's just another way for psychopaths to convince you that you are to blame for their abuse. The only reason why I hate you so much is because your parents are saying. Does that make any sense? That sounds like a lunatic. It sounds like a lunatic. And Dr. Bobby E. Wright, in his book, The Psychopathic Racial Personality Disorder, he already explained that racism, the kind of racism we deal with in America, is lunacy. And we're trying to make it seem as if it's not. This is the worst collective case of Stockholm syndrome I've ever seen, where we blame ourselves for not being good enough. If we were just a little bit better, these racists would hate us a little bit less. If we were a little bit more proud of ourselves, more dignified, more educated, made more money, worked harder. No matter what you believe, their hatred of you is not justified. You only believe that because of your low self-esteem. Only a person with low self-esteem will go around justifying someone else's hatred for you and your kids. And because you don't want to deal with the issue, your children have to deal with it. There was a pattern that the school and law enforcement were working together to conceal the racism our children have to endure. In the first case, police did an investigation and they said, hey, we'll let you know what we come up with. In this case, the police were involved and it's the exact same thing. We're looking into it. We did an investigation. We didn't find any signs of bullying. We didn't find anything. We looked into it. We didn't find anything. So you got a school that's being accused of racism and ignoring the complaints of parents and the pleas of children, right? And in both instances, they're saying, "Oh, we looked into it, and everything seems square on our end." So the schools and law enforcement are working together. Your children are going into an environment where these massive, powerful institutions, these authoritarian institutions, schools and law enforcement, are working against your kids. Your kids are dying, and law enforcement is saying, hey, we couldn't find anything odd. We didn't find anything strange. What about the corpse of the child? You don't think that's a bit strange? We looked into it. We didn't find anything unusual. Well, the dead child didn't tip you off that something unusual was happening. They're not going to take the death of our children seriously, so we have to. So another young man named Seven Charles. This young man was 10 years old. He committed suicide because of racist bullying. He went to Carrick Elementary School in Louisville. His mother came home and found their son's body. Seven was called a racial slur once on a school bus. And then he was choked unconscious by a young man he thought was his friend. See, this is what happens when you decide that it's okay for you to try to befriend racists. This is the consequence. This is the consequence when you try to put yourself in a situation where you try to convince your children that they can love away racism. You can't love away racism. You can't send your children in the midst of a racial war and tell them they can love away racism. If they're good enough, they can behave away racism. If they're smart enough, they can impress away racism. Your children are going into school trying to be friends with people who hate them. At home, these kids are being taught, you see a nigga, you attack them. And you're teaching your kids, somebody tries to attack you, give them a hug. They are lambs to the slaughter because we refuse to take this issue of racism in schools seriously. And this is happening for generations. Generation after generation after generation, we keep telling ourselves that we don't have to necessarily deal with racism directly. We don't have to fight it. Try to make friends. Try to be good. Try to get good grades. And the more we keep trying to ignore racism, our children are the ones dealing with it. And now it's come to the point where more and more of our children can't emotionally deal with this. They can't. If you can't, they can't. If you can't deal with racism and look it dead in the face and attack it, what makes you think your child can? Our children shouldn't have to bear the responsibility of fighting racism. They shouldn't, and they can't. And that's why more and more young Black kids are killing themselves because of the stress and the pain and the agony of dealing with racism. What did we say earlier? Let me find that statistic I just said. Find that stat real quick. It's the second highest cause of death in Black kids from age 10 to 14, suicide. The third leading cause of death in Black kids from 15 to 19, suicide. And we'd be fools to assume that this is not because of the fact that they're dealing with racism blatantly in their face, and they're seeing the consequences of their pride. They're seeing the consequences of their skin color. You're going to get killed. Being Black, you're going to get killed in America. Meanwhile, so many of us Black liberals decide that we want to, or not us Black liberals, but so many Black liberals decide that, hey, you know what, if I'm nice enough, if I'm good enough, if I'm cool enough, if I date somebody who's not Black, that'll solve the problem. There ain't no external savior. Your savior has to be within you, and you have to be the one to take care of this situation, or your kids are going to be the ones to suffer from the situation in the future. They're going to suffer. This young man, Seven Charles, was choked unconscious on a school bus. That means there was a bus driver there and there was a bus attendant there. I used to work at a school. There were always two adults, the bus driver and the bus monitor, on the bus watching things. So that means you had two, most likely Caucasian adults, watching a young Caucasian kid choke a Black kid on a school bus until the Black kid passed out. Seven's mother, Tammy Charles, she had to press the school to engage in disciplinary action, meaning that the school tried to brush it off. She's sitting there saying, my son got choked unconscious on the school bus. Y'all have to do something. And she had to continuously press them for it because the school was reluctant to do anything. This is an educational institution that's deciding to look the other way while Black children are being tortured, bullied, tortured, almost killed on a school bus. Because if you could choke somebody unconscious, one second too long, you could choke somebody dead. So imagine being a young kid in school, only Black kid in the school, only Black kid in his classroom, choked to death while the teachers sit back and watch. Bus drivers, monitors, they're sitting back and watching. So after Seven's mom took action and told the school they better do something, guess what happened then? Seven was shunned. He was shunned by other students and even by some of the other teachers. You got to understand that the teachers are complicit in this racist behavior. Some of the teachers even shunned him. He was shunned and mocked for being a quote unquote snitch. And not too long after that, Seven's mother found him. He would be up in the middle of the night crying uncontrollably. He went into a deep depression. His mother said before he took his life, he was unusually melancholy. And then he killed himself. These are three stories, and I had to stop at three. I had to stop at three stories because of the research that I was doing. I found way more than three. So many came flooding in when I typed in, I typed in, Black student commit suicide because of racist bullying. And then so many stories just popped up. I had to stop at three. It was too mind-blowing. It was too mind-blowing. It was too heavy for me to read all of that. All these young Black children suffering and committing suicide. The idea of committing suicide. 9 years old, 10 years old. Committing suicide because of the racism that you're dealing with. And you're dealing with racism from kids your age. They're attacking you, they're beating you, they're hitting you. And then the teachers are involved. And then law enforcement is involved. The people who are hurting you are not being penalized. And as a young child with a brain that's a supercomputer, you're going to draw conclusions from all the data you're taking in. So these young students are coming to the conclusion that, hey, if I'm being hurt and nobody's being punished, maybe it's okay to hurt me. If I'm being hurt and nobody's being punished, maybe it's okay to hurt me. And then you take your own life. From a combination of the emotional pain, physical agony, the uncertainty, the fear, the isolation, the loneliness, but also just from drawing that conclusion. If somebody can hurt me and nothing's going to happen, it might be okay to hurt me. Why don't I do it? It's just sad. And that's the reason why, a big part of the reason why I do what I do. I want to give Black people the resources to reclaim our inner psychological, emotional power and create stability for ourselves and for our families. Our families can't be stable if we ain't stable. And we need to learn whatever skills are necessary so that we can empower ourselves. I teach mindfulness and meditation. I've used mindfulness and meditation to deal with depression, to deal with panic attacks. Use it. Use whatever skills are available. Use mindfulness and meditation, use therapy, use family support, use everything, because we are up against psychological terrors that nobody else has ever had to deal with before. Nobody else, I don't care what other group you talk about, nobody else has had to deal with the pain, the psychological agony, the terror, the monstrous demon of racism on a level that Black people in America have had to deal with it. And so we're going to need whatever tools are available to make ourselves more powerful, because we need to use everything. We have to get rid of this individualistic mentality of we can solve our problems alone, and we have to get rid of this idea of piecemealing our way to inner peace. You're not going to be able to just use one tactic. You're not going to be able to just use mindfulness and meditation and you're good. You're not going to be able to just use the therapy and you're good. You're not going to be able to just go talk to Nana and you're good. We got to use everything. Mindfulness and meditation is a powerful tool, but we got to use everything. So everybody got to be all hands on deck at all times. So if you're a spiritual healer, hop in the pot. If you're a therapist, hop in the pot. You're a community organizer, hop in the pot. You help resolve family conflict, hop in the pot. Everybody's in. Because look at what's happening to our babies. Look at what's happening to our little ones. They're being put in a situation where they have to face monsters at school, while the other kids are outside playing recess, eating their lunch, eating their snacks, while they're doing their school shopping, while they're in class doodling, while they're nurturing their artistic abilities, or while they're engaged in imaginative play. Our children are trying to figure out how to get out of the classroom alive. And yes, we are going to have to start holding, as a community, as a collective, national and international community, we got to start holding these schools accountable for what happens to our babies. It shouldn't be one parent, one mom fighting against these powerful white supremacist organizations and these powerful white supremacist institutions. It shouldn't be one single mother struggling, doing her absolute best to make sure the school pays for what happened to her children. It shouldn't be one dad. It shouldn't be one family. We like to fight. Let's fight individuals out there who are preying on the minds and the bodies of our children. And we got to psychologically train our kids and prepare our kids emotionally for what they might face out there. I'm teaching my son about Malcolm X and Toussaint Louverture, and telling him about things that our people have endured, and explaining to him that some of those things that we endured in the past have gotten worse. Trying to make him powerful, trying to make him brave, trying to make both my children powerful and brave so they can stand their ground. Because one thing that's not going to happen to my family is my children are not going to be so emotionally and psychologically beat down by racism that they take their own lives. It's going to take organizational power, but it's going to take power over ourselves. We can't change the world and change our situation until we empower ourselves as individuals, then empower our families, then empower our communities. We got to stand our ground, but we got to first stabilize ourselves. Stabilize yourself by looking within yourself and not being afraid of what you'll see. Learn how to control your thoughts. Learn how to control your emotions. Learn how to tap into your own power and your own divinity. Stop being afraid. And stop being in love with individuals who think you're subhuman. Stop being in love with individuals who have trained their children to attack your children on sight because of the color of your kid's skin. It's the only way. Peace and blessings.